Well, hi, Vaughn. Nice to see you again. Here we are, just about a
Harold.
week away from
Yeah,
Election Day. People have started voting in advance polls. What kind of week has it been since we last spoke?
I think it's been a pretty bad week for John Rustad. He did not do well in the debate, and he needed to. And, we had a good example yesterday. He did a press conference with a major announcement about policy change on BC ferries. He wants the ferries built in British Columbia, if possible, which is something the NDP has talked about, but it wasn't an issue with the previous Liberal government. He got almost no coverage on it because all of the questions in the news conference were about this candidate that he has out in Surrey who said something just appalling about Muslims and about whether or not Rustad really saw somebody die on his way to the debate. And that's what's going to happen to you in the middle of a campaign. You can often end up answering for your own problems rather than the policy that you want to do.
Hmm, hmm. And that's an interesting one. That's that candidate in South Surrey, which I imagine is one of those ridings the Conservatives would think they're going to win. So very difficult for him to drop a candidate at this point, I guess. It's
That's a good point. People have said that, Rustad did drop some candidates earlier, and he did. But the problem that you've identified is once we get past nomination day, which is the last day during the campaign that you can nominate a candidate, you're stuck with the candidates you have. If you drop a candidate at this point, the name stays on the ballot, but they're not your candidate anymore. So there's one riding that, in effect, you're kind of writing off. So
right.
it's, political leaders are very reluctant to drop candidates at this point. But in this case, Harold, Rustad said that his dividing line on whether or not to drop a candidate was he wouldn't stand for hatred and racism. Well, you know, I'm not going to repeat what this guy
Yeah,
said, but it's out there if people want to know. But it's monstrous. We don't, decent people don't talk like that about a major community in British Columbia, the
right.
Muslims, right? And more than that, too, this is doubly reflects bad on Rustad because he insisted that the Conservatives had done a thorough job of vetting their candidates. Okay, this was a comment the guy made 10 years ago, but it's there on social media. Somebody else found it. So, how good was his vetting? Well, he now admits that maybe the vetting wasn't all that thorough.
Interesting. Okay, so if it was a bad week for Rustad, how was it for David Eby?
Well, I would say in general that the New Democrats are more confident than they were at the beginning of the campaign. So, when we started, dead heat country, David Eby was busy changing his positions on a bunch of issues. And because their own internal polling showed the New Democrats that they were in trouble in parts of the province where they'd won easily last time. So now I would say the combination of Eby having done having reversed himself on some positions, and by doing that, strengthening his platform. He's not as vulnerable on the carbon tax because he'd like to get rid of it as well. So that, and the other thing is, look, Rustad and the Conservatives have made it easier. David Eby goes to a news conference and he doesn't need to say a hell of a lot about what he's going to do. He gets to, you know, get morally indignant and Harold, whatever you think of our political parties, nobody does moral superiority better than a New Democrat. And that's been on display with Eby as well. So I don't think he did all that well in the election debate, but we saw him, the leadership debate, but we saw him again spend his time not talking about what the NDP would do, but attacking John Rustad. There was one very funny moment, I thought, during the debate where the moderator, Shachi Kurl, asked Eby, are you like more interested in taking on John Rustad than talking about what you would do for the next 4 years? And Eby said, oh, no, no. And then spent the next minute attacking John Rustad. Like, okay, Rustad's line on this, Harold, is okay. I think he could make the case better, but he says, look, Eby's got a lot of answering to do for his own record, so of course he would sooner attack John Rustad. But the Conservatives and John Rustad have put up a target-rich environment too. A lot of what Eby's attacking them for is stuff they've actually said and done. Sometimes he distorts it. Often he just has to quote them.
Now, the other thing that's a little troubling, or at least frustrating from our perspective as journalists, is that John Rustad and the Conservatives still have not released a full platform. They're certainly making announcements every day, but no platform. Is that on the horizon? We're a week away.
Well, they said that it would be coming out this week. So he's got what, till like Friday at 6:00, I guess, to put it out. I think he's struggling, particularly yesterday, to deal with the fallout from the debate and from these comments from the candidate in Surrey, and from the fact that he claimed on the debate to have seen a guy die from an overdose, and there's no record of that having happened. I mean, Harold, according to the records, 6 or 7 British Columbians a day die of a drug overdose, but Rustad seems to have managed to find one that didn't. So I think because of all that, he may have put off the platform till next week. I thought we were going to get it yesterday or today, and maybe we'll still get it today. But I think they've decided that give it a fresh start next week. They have announced a lot of policy. Yes. So it's not like they've, and what they've said is we're going to put all the policy together and then you'll get a complete platform. And they've said they will do what the New Democrats and the Greens have already done, which is they'll cost the platform. Right. So we got that. It's always debatable with political parties, but we got some numbers from the Greens. They're going to increase spending by $8 billion. And they're going to increase taxes by $9 billion. And they listed which taxes. And the New Democrats, they costed out about $3 billion in additional spending. They didn't provide a cost accounting on their promise to phase out the carbon tax, so we don't know what that works. But so it's only partial, but it's still more detail, you're right, than we've gotten from the Conservatives.
Right. And I guess unlike at the federal level, we don't have the equivalent of a parliamentary budget office that reviews promises, do we?
It's kind of a side story, but Harold, we have an auditor general, who could do this kind of thing, but the auditor general in BC doesn't seem to be interested in that. I agree with you, though. I think a parliamentary budget officer would be better because they act more quickly. But I mean, I'm surprised that our auditor general here in BC, who's got enormous power to look at government bookkeeping and documentation and what stuff is really costing. It's rare that we get anything from the office of the BC Auditor General that really costs anything or really looks at an alternative to the government's claims about provincial finances and what programs are costing and so forth.
Right. Now, we haven't talked about the Greens and Sonia Furstenau. I know that they haven't moved much. If anything, they've gone back a little bit in some of the polls. And even she says they're not going to form government. But what do you think it's been like for her? And what are you looking for in the final week from the Green Party?
Well, the Greens, 2 things this week. I mean, the first is that I think people generally thought she acquitted herself well in the debate. She speaks well, she's clear. She took some shots at the NDP. She took a lot more shots at the BC Conservatives. I think, first of all, you're right, says she doesn't expect to win the election. She'd like to have the balance of power. If she had the balance of power, based on what she said about John Rustad, I'm sure she would end up supporting the NDP for another term. But the other thing she did this week was they put out a list of about a dozen, maybe 10 seats where they think they have their best shot at winning. And They include First to Know's seat here in the provincial capital, Victoria Beacon Hill, where I'm coming to you from right now. They include Saanich, north in the islands, which is the seat that, good God, have I forgotten his name?
Adam?
Adam Olson. How soon we
Yes,
forget
of
in this
course.
business. And he's still around. He'll be so,
Of
yeah.
course. Yeah.
And then there's a few seats. There's a West Van seat. There's one in the Kootenays. These are seats where the Greens have come close in the past. So, you know, I mean, First to Know is saying, in one sense, Harold, she's talking to the kind of people that we hear from every now and then in our business, which is people who, frankly, aren't very happy with either of the major parties, and they'd like to think about voting for somebody else. And the Greens are saying, okay, well, here we are. Right now, people may not like their platform on some things, but they're saying, you know, elect us and maybe we'll make a situation where no one party has a majority of seats. The other group out there, which is the biggest unknown, is the independents. We have a bunch of independents running in ridings in the province who have a political profile. Some of them were MLAs when the House was dissolved. They were MLAs for BC United. They were abandoned when their party leaders decided to shut BC United down. And they're running as independents, but they're in an unusual situation of running as independents with a profile. So we have to say, since the pollsters really can't get at it unless you can go right down to the riding level, and only the political parties do that kind of polling, we have to think some of these independents may have a shot at getting elected to the legislature, and they may hold the balance of power if there's a balance of power.
Certainly, even if they don't win, as you say, Vaughn, the Conservatives or the Independents could hive votes off of one or the other sides and influence the outcome that way.
Yeah, and you're right. And the other thing that happens, and I'll use Victoria Beacon Hill as the example because it's my riding and it's where First to Know is running. There's signs here that we're into a three-way race here. So you've got Cabinet Minister Grace Lohr, but not one of the stronger members of Cabinet, NDP. Tim Thielman, who's a lawyer in town with a good profile. He's done a lot of work for Indigenous nations, and he's done a good job organizing. His campaign ad, which is available on YouTube if people want to see it, is a very good ad. And then you've got First to Know. So, you know, if it's a genuinely three-way race, you can win the seat with 35% of the vote. Okay. And anybody can win it. You could, the vote splitting thing gets really confusing when you try to figure out, you know, what happens if some New Democrat votes for the Greens and some, you know, Conservative or former BC Liberal vote. You know, it's one of those. Now, the parties may have the kind of detailed opinion polling that tell you whether or not this seat is really at play, but obviously, First to Know would like to win her own seat. She's never run here before, although she lives here. She was previously an MLA for a seat up island, but the riding boundaries changed, and she doesn't think that seat is as safe anymore. And by the way, people, make sure you got that little card you're supposed to get in the mail. Mine only arrived 2 days ago, and I'm hearing from some people that they haven't gotten their voter.
Didn't get mine yet, the voting card.
And the reason it's important is because with all these riding boundaries changed, and the names of the ridings have changed, you may be voting somewhere that you're not aware of. You can register at the last minute at the polling station if you've got good ID. You can go on to the Elections BC website and type in your own address, and it will tell you where your riding is, and they'll also tell you where the advance polling station is. But I'm hearing that the mails have been delayed, and there's a lot of people apparently in your position that haven't gotten their registration, your registered card, and here's where you go to vote.
Very good reminder for people. We also, on our website, our data journalist Nathan Griffiths created a searchable database as well. You can go on there, enter your address, and you'll get the candidates in your riding, what your riding is, and who won the last election by whatever voting margin. So different ways certainly out there for people to find that information. Okay, Vaughn, when we talk next Friday, it'll be the day before the election, and I'll be looking
Yes.
forward to your bold prediction for Saturday night, and also we'll have one final poll to talk.
Just to wrap up, we've had 2 opinion polls this week. One had the NDP ahead, and one has the Conservatives ahead. And we've also are expecting more polling today and more again on Monday. So I think the Conservatives have stalled, and I think the NDP is more confident than they were. But have I ever been wrong before, Harold? Just ask Premier Adrian Dix.
All right, Vaughn. We'll talk next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.